right in the spotlight. Follow the light. So, Greg, one of the things we want to talk about is influences. And given the fact that it's the 50th anniversary of Steven Spielberg's masterpiece, Jaws, which was a huge influence on you, I want to talk about why that film not only had an impact on you and your career, but just how it sort of lit the fuse on your love of genre.
Well, hi, everybody, first of all. Hi. I was really lucky growing up because my parents took me to see everything. So every movie that came out, I went to the theater. I saw Planet of the Apes, and I saw The Omen, and I saw Jaws. And my parents went opening night, and then they're like, "Yeah, you can see this. It's not too bad." I was 12.
PG.
And then, of course, every time something scary happened, she would cover my eyes. So I didn't see Quint get eaten by the shark until like the 12th time because I was so traumatized. But my parents were big movie buffs. And it's going in and out, so it's not very loudly.
He's great. Thanks.
Oh, look at that.
Hey, look at that. I get it my own. See, I broke it already.
Nice.
So, I consider myself very fortunate.
Dun,
but not with microphones.
Not with microphones. You guys can hear me, so it's fine. I grew up, loving special effects and loving monsters and Jaws and Dawn of the Dead and Tom Savini and all that stuff. That was what made me really, I fell in love with it. And, growing up in Pittsburgh, I never thought I would end up in Hollywood. I just thought, I'm just going to be a fan and I'll go to conventions. I went to a Star Trek convention in 1975 and met Bill Shatner for the first time and bought my first Jaws poster, which I still have. So I consider myself very fortunate. And there have been many times when I was sitting in the exact same seats that you guys are, watching panels and learning about, meeting people and getting starstruck but I just somehow or another, it led me to getting an apprentice job on Day of the Dead because Tom Savini and I were friends. And George, I met at a restaurant in Italy on a family vacation. And he's like, "Oh, you should come down to the office in Fort Pitt Boulevard and come visit." And I was like, "Hell yeah." So when I got my driver's license, I think the first place I drove was down to George's office in Pittsburgh.
Before you continue with your path,
yes,
what age did you see 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Oh, young. Like, I had no idea what it was. The joke was that was in the theaters for years.
Yes.
And it was like every Mother's Day, my dad would be like, "We're going to take your mom out to dinner." And then we would go see 2001: A Space Odyssey. So like for years.
Yeah.
Because
I saw it when I was 7.
Yeah.
And it screwed me up for the rest of my life.
I had no idea I still don't know what it's about.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of know because if you read the novelization.
It's about 2 hours.
Yeah. Longer than that. But again, those movies back then, it was an experience. And you'd sit in the theater and
you were transported.
When the Discovery was going, that long shot of when they showed the date and the Discovery is going by and it's rumbling and you're just pulled into it. And it's, it breaks my heart that experience is gone for so many people now because they're never going to know seeing something in, 70 millimeter or seeing Logan's Run or those movies that came out and the aspect ratio and the sound was so big, it just sucked you into it. When you see Alien in those shots going through the ship at the beginning and you hear everything and it's immersive and
visceral experience.
It really was. And it changed your life.
At that young age, did Dick Smith's accomplishment in that movie clock for you, or was it not until The Exorcist?
Dick Smith doesn't work on it.
Didn't
No, that was...
okay. When you saw The Exorcist...
You're not an expert, Mark.
I actually want to ask you about on Jaws because you just executive produced a documentary about the 50th anniversary.
Yes.
Obviously, that is some well-worn ground. There have been a lot of documentaries on the Laserdisc, on the DVD, on the Blu-ray. Richard Dreyfuss has told some well-trodden stories about the shark is not working. What don't we know about that movie that we're going to learn in your new documentary?
Well, I'll tell you. So the documentary was produced and directed by a guy named Laurent Bouzereau. Laurent does all of Steven's documentaries. He did one on John Williams that came out not long ago, which is great if you haven't seen it. I think it's on Disney Plus.
Terrific.
But Laurent has done a lot of really great documentaries. But the thing I liked about it the most, other than I'm in it, is that you really get to hear Steven talking about the movie with some perspective. Like the other big documentary that came out was in 96 or 97. It was on the Laserdisc. But I still think it was too soon for him to really talk about it in the perspective. So for me, what I really appreciate about the documentary is it feels like he's really talking to me about what it was like to make the movie. And documentaries are tough because, today anybody can make one. Anyone can make a documentary. Hey, I'm doing a documentary, and I put a Kickstarter out and they steal your money and whatever. But what I appreciated about this was it really, to me, felt like it was intimate and that he was having a conversation with me about what it was like to make the movie. And yeah, we've all heard stories and, interestingly enough, we restored the last original casting of the shark from Jaws that was on display at Universal Studios. It used to hang by the tail in the back lot in the 70s. It was all green and, looked like nothing like anything. Couldn't figure out what color it was. But that when they replaced that shark, the original shark went to a junkyard. So we restored it. So if you get to California and you see the shark at the museum, that's from the
Academy
original
Museum,
mold. And I resculpted the inside of the mouth and we put all the original teeth in. So as far as as the closest I'll ever having get to work on Jaws is to restore the shark.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your experience viewing it, right? Those first 12 times before you actually got to see the entire movie.
Yeah.
Look, my son, he's about to turn 16. He saw that movie for the first time when he was 12. Totally, not only fell in love with it, it turned him into somebody who really appreciates film and thinks about it. But you're sitting in the theater and your mother is covering your eyes. And I'm just sort of picturing you thinking, Mom, do you have no idea who I am? But she's covering your eyes. And yet you go to see it again and again. If your mother had not covered your eyes the first time, do you think you would have walked away with the fascination that you have of that movie now? Do you think that had any impact on you in terms of your love of horror versus?
Well, that's a great question because I have a very vivid imagination, as you may have noticed by
Yes.
the stuff that I do. And I remember reading the book. And in the book, when it describes finding Chrissy's remains on the beach, it's very descriptive and it's really graphic. So in my head, the first time I was picturing what I had imagined, and then you see the movie and it's the little arm and the crabs and you're kind of like, okay. But what happened for me was a lot of times what I imagined was way worse than was ever in the movie. And in that instance, I think even with Chrissy's, with the Chrissy arm scene, I don't remember if I didn't see it the first time. I don't think I did, but I imagined way worse. So when I finally had the nerve to actually watch it, it was worse. It wasn't as bad as what I had imagined it. So I think my imagination really sort of created something that was much different. You have to remember movies back in the 70s, when you think about George Romero and you think about Wes Craven and Tobe Hooper, those guys were pushing the boundaries. In the late 60s and early 70s, when somebody would say, you can't show that on a movie, and they'd be like, oh, really? Well, watch this.
Yeah.
And half the time, like in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when, you never see anybody ever hit with a chainsaw, but it's what's implied. So all of those filmmakers were really pushing the boundaries of what they could get away with. Can we get away with that? Can we get away with that? And then every time they would push the boundaries, they'd get away with a little bit more. Then you get into like Friday the 13th and Dawn of the Dead, when all of a sudden they're like, screw it. And they were like, it's going to be unrated. We're going to do everything. And they're blowing up heads and people are being bitten by zombies. And that really was the big turning point for genre movies. Because then they're like, wait, well, if we can do that, it still blows me away watching the Walking Dead trailer that we did that on TV. Because half the stuff that we did on TV 10 years ago, when we did Land of the Dead, which was 6 years before Walking Dead, we couldn't do it in a movie. And then all of a sudden we're doing it on TV. So, you gotta give it up to those trailblazers and those filmmakers that pushed the boundaries. You know, when you try to tell somebody, oh, when The Exorcist was out, people were around the block, waiting in line around the block, and then they would run screaming from the movie theater. Now you're like, no, get out of here. But back then, they had never seen anything like that in movies before. And I'm really proud that I was part of the generation of people that were able to push those boundaries even more. And so, you know, as an old man that I am, you know, you get to that point where you try to explain to people, God, you don't understand what it was like when we were younger. You know, that they never showed that on TV and they never showed that in the theater. But that's what lured you in, was that sort of taboo, almost, you know, like, how do you see something like that in a movie theater? Which was so exciting, you know, to get the paper on Friday night, you know, and you'd go through the newspaper. There's two great books out that Mike Kingold did. Have you seen these?
Yeah, the old newspaper ads. Yeah.
There's two books called Ad Nauseum. One's a horror, and then I think the other one's sci-fi.
Yeah.
And basically, it's the newspaper clippings of every movie when I was growing up. Oh, wow. From that, they made
the actual newspaper ad, so it has the key art, but the theaters that they play.
Yeah, it's so great, because that's what we did when we were all kids. You'd scour the newspaper and, you know, you'd see the trailers on TV.
See the time.
Social media.
They play.
The only time you knew was to look at the newspaper.
But it's interesting, because I know I've experienced this, that the movies and TV that affected me the most and made me the most interested in the business of it were the ones that scared me, because I wanted to find out how they made me scared. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you felt the same thing and felt that pull to find out more about how it was done.
Well, I think that's part of my DNA to begin with, because, you know, when you had Famous Monsters magazine, there would always be pictures in Jack Pierce's lab or the Westmore's lab, and you'd see them putting the creature from the Black Lagoon suit on somebody. Right. I would be the guy looking at the molds on the wall, and trying to read what the names on you know, the materials were. And then, of course, so yeah, I was always fascinated, because there's a switch that clearly he and I have that breaks it down in terms of, you can process it one way to be entertained and turn your brain off, or you
you're
watch
interested in the narrative, but you're also
trying to figure out how they did it. Yeah. And that's, you know, nowadays that experience is also gone, because how they do it. Oh, they did this.
Yep.
And they pushed a couple buttons.
Yeah. In Cinefx, it'd be a finger on a keyboard.
Yeah. It's really sad, but the practical element and the practical nature of it, you know, I always talk about Aliens as a movie that I think is technically flawless. Because Jim Cameron, who was a special effects artist and an art director, when he had a chance to direct that movie, he used every trick in the book. It was rear projection, miniatures, guys in suits, quarter scale. He used every trick in the book. And I read an interview recently with him, and he was like, yeah, if I remade that movie today, it would all be CG. And I'm like, yeah, but what you lose when you make a comment like that is you lose the experience of trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Which is half the fun. The best meeting you ever have on a movie is the first meeting where budget doesn't matter.
Right. The blue sky.
Schedule doesn't matter. You can just talk about, like, what are we going to do? Like, what do you say to the director? What do you want to see? And the director explains what he wants to see. And then you go off and you're like, wow, we could do this. Or maybe we could do that. Or what if we did this? And it's just that sort of free-for-all. Those are the best meetings that you ever have.
And then it dies a death in 1,000
Lower your
cuts.
Scooby-Doo blanket. I'm freezing. You look so warm. I might...
I want to...
Don't be mad. I might cuddle with your wife, because I'm freezing.
I want to add to what Darren said regarding understanding the process, because for us, I think the book that told us we could work in the TV business was Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry's Making of Star Trek, Stephen Whitfield. That said, oh my God, this is how they make the shows, this is how they write the shows, this is how they build the sets. But for movies, that key book and to this day is still probably the best book ever written about the making of a movie, and the most honest, because now these books are licensed, they're not honest, was the Jaws log.
Yeah.
And can you talk about its influence on you and subsequently your interest in turning it into a film yourself?
Okay, so the interesting thing about seeing Jaws for the first time was aside from my mom covering my eyes. I remember we're walking through, it was the Gateway Theater, downtown Pittsburgh, on June 21st, 1975. I remember the date. Not that I'm a nerd or anything, but, and they used to have these things called lobby cards in the movie theater. And there were 8 key photos from the movie. They don't do it anymore, unfortunately. And there was one of Hooper in the cage with the shark swimming by. And I was like, oh my God, that shark's huge. And then I was fascinated. And then there's the shot in the estuary where Teddy Grossman, they show the shark for the first time in the movie, and the shark is sideways and he's screaming and it bites down and then the leg floats down. It's, and I was instantly like, I wanted to know how they did it. I needed to know, like, who are the people that built the shark? Now, weirdly enough, they're all really good friends of mine. Probably because I sat in their yard for 5 years at a time. But then, you find yourself fascinated with it and you want to learn how to do it. So the Jaws log comes out. Carla Gottlieb wrote it, who co-wrote the script. But the funny thing about it is it's a super cheeky book. Like, he doesn't really tell you much. And there were no pictures of the shark, which I was kind of pissed about. He was just it was like almost, because Carl Gottlieb was a comedy writer and he had written with Steve Martin, and he was in MASH, Smothers Brothers. So he was kind of a comedy guy. So the book was kind of cheeky about, is it a real shark or was it not a real shark? And how did they do it? And but then there was another book that came out right after that called The Making of the Movie Jaws, which was done by a woman named Edith Blake. Edith Blake lived on Martha's Vineyard and had a camera and walked around and photographed everything. Like, nowadays, they would take your cameras away. You'd have to sign an NDA. But when they were shooting on Martha's Vineyard in 1974, the sharks were literally on these big barges in the middle of the bay. Anybody could just walk up and take pictures of them. So this woman went through and took pictures of all the sharks and all the behind the scenes. And that book came out right after the Jaws log. Weirdly enough, Universal, like, yeah, we don't give a shit. Sorry. Crap. Sorry. There's like little kids here. I don't want to swear.
I don't know.
She's not listening.
I don't think she has a blanket either. So.
She's cold. I know. They're cold. So yeah. And then that book came out and that had like more behind the scenes. And I remember like there was like the Time and Newsweek all started printing articles about the shark and how they made the shark. And again, you got to remember it's 1975, and the only way that you could see the sharks in the movie for like 4 minutes or something. There's not, you go to the movie and you have that impression, that initial shot of it, and it's burned into your brain. You can't pause it. You can't rewind it. You can't fast forward when you first see it. It's in your brain. And that's, I think, the impact of movies like The Exorcist and Jaws and when video came out, then you could pause it and you could watch it back and forth and over again. And yeah, you fell more in love with it because you appreciated it, but it also took the magic away, and the magic that's what I do, is suspend disbelief. And so, as much as you appreciate the fact that movies can be viewed over and over again, like when I saw John Carpenter's The Thing the first time, my girlfriend at the time was so mad because she wanted to see E.T. And I'm like, oh, this is...
So did most of America.
Yeah, most of America wanted to see E.T. And I'm like, no, this is it's an alien movie.
Like E.T.
It's like E.T. It's an alien. It'll be great.
It loves you too much.
So she almost literally vomited on me. She was so... And meanwhile, I'm like, Rob Bottin is the greatest. And saw the movie, but again, a million times. But... for me, it was just going on the adventure. And like, that's my only criteria. If anybody says to me now, like, what's your criteria? I'm like, I want to be entertained. That's all I want. Like, it doesn't have to be flashy. Just tell me a good story and take me on a good ride. And, that's all I want. It should be easy.
But you're a magician, right? It's like that. You said you do the magic. And obviously, the tools that we have available to us now to make the magic have evolved. They're different. You talked a little bit about how, Jim Cameron saying we do everything CG, but my God, why would you do that? Is there still a place for those kinds of practical effects in this kind of filmmaking? Do you think there's ever going to be a time when people simply don't learn those skills, when they don't exist?
Well, I'll say never in regards to that. But, the truth of the matter is a lot of the filmmakers that are coming into their own now were influenced by these movies that we're talking about. So they want something practical, like I remember, when we had Eli Roth and Alex Aja and that sort of group of filmmakers, they were all inspired by Sam Raimi and Wes Craven. So they wanted practical stuff. They wanted that. It's challenging now because less and less movies are being made. And there's a lot of stuff on TV, but TV is a medium that is really bound by schedules and budgets because you shoot a TV show in 8 days, 10 days. And it's easier and quite frankly, lazier to just go, we'll just do it later. Like we're working on a show right now and there's a scene where a character gets into a fight in a prison, takes the barbell and crushes guy's head in. And I'm on the call and I'm like, hey, well, so look, we'll make a fake head of the guy. I said, we'll put the blood bag on the barbell, just like I did with Negan's bat when Negan killed Glenn.
Spoiler alert.
When the barbell hits, you get instant blood. You don't have to put blood. See, this is the shit I learned over 40 years of my career. You could put a blood bag in the head. And then when you smash it, a lot of times the blood might not come out where you want it to come out because it's liquid and it goes wherever physics tells it to go. So if you want to see instant blood, the blood bag has to be on the outside. So when we did the Negan gags, I was like, guys, make a rubber bat. And when you hit, they will backlight the blood and you'll see the blood instantly. So I pitched this whole thing and one of the showrunners, a good friend of mine, he's like, sounds great. And then the producer was like, we should just do it digitally. I'm like, but you want to do it like the new Final Destination movie. I went to the theater to see it. And there was not one practical kill in the movie. It was all CG and it just like it took away some of the fun for me because then I went, well, I wanted to see like a fake head of somebody getting crushed in a trash compactor. And when it's, if you made a fake head, like in Casino, when they put Joe Pesci's head in the vice, I did that gag. Crush, crush, crush. And Marty's like, what would happen? I'm like, fuck, I don't know. Like, I've never crushed a guy's head in a vice before. Sorry, kids.
Summon a PA.
Cassandra, your daughter's looking at you because I swore.
Oh, yeah.
But, so my dad's a doctor. So I called my dad and said, hey, what would happen if we put a guy's head in a vice? And he said, well, the eye probably wouldn't come out. It's still attached, but the bone would crush and it would bulge the eye. So we put a little air bladder behind it and pop the eye. And so we try to make it look real. But then now it would just be a CG effect and they would warp the eye and the blood wouldn't look right. And it just didn't look right. Who else saw Final Destination? Holy shit. Like 8 people. Wow. Boy, that's bad.
It's probably the final destination. I think.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Well, wait, who saw it? Wait, raise your hand again. What did you think? Is that Janet? Julie, I was close. I remember the J.
Yeah.
I met her yesterday. So what did you think of the movie? Okay, what about you guys back there? Loved it. Okay, but see, that's the thing. Young people, God love them, because they're like, fuck, who cares? It was great. It was fun and it was outrageous. And so, I think some of what we're talking about up here is also a product of our generation of stuff who loves the practical element. You want to see the fake head and you want to blow it up and, you don't. But, a lot of times like these guys, they came and visited my table and they're all excited. But
it's a Looney Tunes.
You don't care, right? You don't care if it's practical or digital as long as it looks cool, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they didn't have Bugs Bunny
All right,
cartoons.
I quit. Just kidding.
It's funny.
They didn't have Bugs Bunny. Yeah. That's a good point.
You talk in 1982. It's like, I remember working in a video store and the two films that always came in not rewound were The Thing and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Two different reasons that people looked at seeing.
Weirdly, Fast Times at Ridgemont High was always stopped at the same place.
That movie was terrifying. I do have to say real quick. So Mark and I have known each other, he said, for a long time. He offered me my first directing job.
That's right. And you couldn't do it because
I couldn't do it.
That fucker Quentin, right?
Yes. Blame Quentin Tarantino. But back before, because now subsequently I've directed 40 episodes of The Walking Dead and Creepshow and Daryl Dixon and all that kind of stuff. But years and years ago, we were developing a movie and he had a project that he wanted me to direct. And he's like, hey, man, have you ever thought about directing a movie? And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe. I mean, doing special effects. He said, I think you would be really good for that. So ahead of his time.
It's so funny because my next question to you was,
why did you turn me down?
No. Was after all the success that you had as a special makeup effects artist, you've gone on to a very successful directing career. But for 20 years, you had a chance to work with some of the top directors in the business. And I'm curious of what, who are the people that you learned the most from, or what were the takeaways, the lessons that you learned working with some of these people that you applied to your own directing career?
Well, wow. That's a great question. I mean, I've been in the trenches with the greatest directors of our generation, and if you look at someone like Quentin, who it's no CGI, it's all character bound. It's all about the performances. And then you have somebody like Robert Rodriguez, where you shoot it on green screen, and one day you have Bruce Willis, and one day you have Mickey Rourke, and one day you have Jessica Alba, and then they just put them all together. Very different, very different technologies involved. But both equally passionate filmmakers, just very different. So I think I probably adopted more from my experiences with Quentin or Frank Darabont, because they were really ensemble character stuff. I was always very confident in the genre stuff, in directing the spooky, scary stuff. I felt like, look, if I don't know how to do that now, then I'm in trouble. But finding the moments where the characters draw you into the story is what makes any material good. And, when the funny thing is we did season 2 of Walking Dead, and Frank said, you're ready to direct. You want to direct an episode? And I went, yeah, I do. Thanks. I would love to. And he said, do you want a zombie heavy episode or a zombie light episode?
It's a good question.
And I'm like, that's a trick question. And I said, in my head, I want a zombie light episode. Give me something with some meat.
And with a zombie.
With a zombie.
Yeah.
Without meat.
I had one zombie in the first episode I ever directed, and it was the episode in season 2 where Dale dies. And it was one zombie. And the whole episode was really like 12 Angry Men. They were all sitting around debating whether or not they were going to kill Randall, this guy that they found. And so, my research, I was like watching 12 Angry Men, and I watched all this stuff, and was really getting into it. And the irony was I had one zombie in the whole episode. And that was the first one that I did out of 40, and then was, just kind of went.
And after a gazillion seasons, people still talk about that episode. It's still in the pantheon of great Walking Dead episodes.
It was a great, especially at the moment where Dale's lying there and Daryl comes up and points the gun at him and said, I'm sorry, brother, and shoots him, boy, The Walking Dead for the first 6 years is still one of the greatest shows ever made. It's so good. It went a little off the rails by the end, I'll be honest. I love the Whisperer stuff because that was very Michael Myers. You can't see their faces and they're emotionless, but there's too many characters, and then they didn't want to kill anybody because they wanted to do spin-offs. So you're like, well, no one's going to die. Like, where's the fun in that? But even watching the trailer, I'm like, damn, I would watch that show. That looks really good. So it's an honor. And, one of the things that I really am proud of is sort of reintroducing practical makeup effects to a modern generation of people. Because before that, you never saw anything like that on TV, ever. And when we were selling Walking Dead, basically, I made 4 zombie busts for Frank and Gail, and they took them around to the studios, and they're like, this is what the zombies are going to look like. And everybody's like, why would we want to do that? Like, HBO passed, NBC, everybody passed. And then Charlie Collier at AMC went, yeah, this is kind of interesting. So I really do feel that Walking Dead, and particularly our contribution to it, opened the doors for a lot of stuff that now it's all over the place. Even Game of Thrones, which was just after us, American Horror Story, a lot of those shows, I think, felt empowered to push the envelope because then they saw what we were doing.
And you were
And Last of Us, the guys on Last of Us were like, yeah, we just stole Walking Dead. Like, I like Last of Us, but it's hard for me to watch it because I'm like, I've seen this already. And it's Walking Dead. It's like, literally, like.
Have you seen anything recently that made you go, Jesus, I wish that I had done that? Or how did they do that? Or try to
Effects-wise?
Yeah, effects-wise, or even just in terms of, really getting drama out of horror.
I loved Sinners, which I think was basically a remake of From Dusk Till Dawn, but very well made. I don't know. I don't really look at stuff anymore because so much, I would say the makeup in Penguin is magnificent. Mike Marino did that makeup, and it's so great that I love looking at that and being like, holy crap.
He's completely unrecognizable, and all his expressions come out.
And he's fully committed.
Amazing.
It's like when we did Mickey Rourke on Marv, and on Sin City, the actors have to be committed.
Yeah.
And if they complain or the makeup is on them and they start whining about how hot it is or how sweaty they are, then you're screwed. You're like, oh, well.
Did you guys do the buffalo on Dances with Wolves?
We did.
I remembered hearing that because I think that is, given your vast work with zombies and stuff like that, that is unreal enough so that the audience will believe anything. But when you see that in Dances with Wolves, you believe that they just took a bunch of buffalo and skinned them.
They probably would have, because we shot on a buffalo ranch in Pierre, South Dakota. It's the same. So the way we got the job on Dances with Wolves was we had done a movie prior to that called Gross Anatomy. And it was a Disney movie that Deborah Hill produced, of all people, about people in medical school. And Deborah Hill George Romero recommended me and said Nicotero was going to be a doctor and went to pre-med, and then I corrupted him into special effects. And George used to say, I'm so sorry. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is the fake stuff way better than the real stuff. So we went in and we interviewed, and we got the job partially because I had pre-med experience and studied, anatomy and stuff. And the first field trip, we went to the medical school in Long Beach, and they pulled the drawer out and they unzip it, and there's a cadaver there. And it looked fake. It didn't look real to me. I knew it was real, but there was something about it. And I'm like, that's not a person. So when we made the cadavers, and basically the medical school said, I hear you guys need some cadavers for this movie. Well, we can sell them to you for $150 each. And then the filmmaker was like, wait, you're going to want us to put real cadavers on a movie set for 6 weeks with lights and cameras and have the actors digging real guts out of.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we can't do that. So we made them. So of course. And then we had our Dances with Wolves meeting, and Kevin Costner looked at the bodies we had done for Gross Anatomy and hired us to do Dances with Wolves. So we were first of all, we're the longest running makeup effects company in the world, because we started in 1988. Same principal people, myself and Howard Berger, are still there. We haven't changed the name. We haven't changed hands. It's the same people. But we started off, and within 1 year of our company's inception, we jumped that gore horror world and got the opportunity to be involved in mainstream stuff like Dances with Wolves and City Slickers and all the Castle Rock movies, Misery and Sibling Rivalry. We did all those movies. Casino, yeah. So we kind of jumped ahead of a lot of the other companies that was doing Nightmare on Elm Street 3, 4, 5, Halloween 4, 5, 6, 7.
Made it respectable.
Well, we sort of wormed our way in a time when, look, there were a lot of makeup effects houses out there, but we somehow or another got a different kind of reputation. There was a movie called Alex Winter did Freak.
I storyboarded it.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. Freak. There was this movie Alex Winter did, and we interviewed that all the makeup effects characters were super outrageous, like Big Daddy Roth.
Yeah.
And we went and interviewed, and he's like, your stuff looks too real. and didn't hire us. And I'm like, well, we can do whatever we want. You're just looking at samples of our previous work. Yeah. And we didn't get the job because of that. And I remember thinking like,
Yeah, right.
but then nobody saw it anyway, so I didn't care.
Yeah. Lack of success is the best revenge.
It kind of is.
Well, we should open it up to questions because I know you guys probably have a ton of questions. So there's a mic right here. And
Yeah, who's my friend that I said I made them come and ask a question? I know. Wait. Oh, they didn't come.
and if you have a blanket, you can go to the front of the line if you give it to Greg.
Yes.
Here comes the first victim.
Yay. His head's going to explode.
He's a
Ready?
big fan of Frank's.
Go.
We need the mic turned on in the audience.
It looks like it's on. The green light's on.
There we go.
Test.
There we go.
Hey there. Hey, my name is Isaac. I'm a huge fan of The Walking Dead. I've been watching since season 2 when I was also 12. And my question for you is, on a typical day of filming, do you have like a surplus of walkers that you just kind of put into the scene, or are they like demand for the scene? Like the scene demands like this amount of walkers?
Well, wait. So first of all, you've never seen season 1?
I have. I watched it after
good.
season 2.
It's only 6 episodes. Come on.
Scared me.
I know I was late.
We in our initial meetings, when you get a script in television, the first thing you do is you have a concept meeting. So you sit down with the director and you sit down with the crew and you just talk through scene by scene. Okay, the zombies attack. Well, how many zombies do you think you need in this? And the writer will say, well, I think we need 12 or we need 15 or we need 200 or whatever. So you have to, kind of figure that out. Every year we had a group of probably 15 people that were our go-to zombies. 2 of them that just literally are texting me right now.
Great.
We're two moms in Georgia who had special needs kids, and they would come to set, and they were the best zombies, and it was like that. They're sort of like the one time they could do something for themselves that they weren't doing for someone else all the time. Amazing women. But a lot of times we'd have this troop of people, and they would be the hero people over and over again. The best thing about the prosthetics is you won't recognize them. You could have the same guy in there 30 times. And the thing I always liked was they would walk up and talk to the actors like, hey, good morning. And the actor's like, I have no idea who you are. Well, you killed me yesterday. And they're like, oh, no. So yeah, a lot of times, and then we would break it down into hero makeups, mid-ground, which were the paint makeups, and then the masks in the background. And so you would have enough. Very rarely did, obviously in the big giant scenes, we would do digital augmentation, like, with crowds of thousands of zombies and stuff. But that's how we did it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's where the CG is helpful, is the tiling.
For sure. And sometimes some of the blood stuff, that's a good point. Pardon me. I'll give you one. I'll be with you in a second. There's a scene that I shot that I'm super proud of in the Terminus episode, when they're all kneeling in front of the troughs and the guys are going behind them and they're hitting them in the head with the baseball bats. And then they slit their throats. So Scott Gimple wrote that episode and we had a big, long conversation about it. I said, look, we got to do the baseball bat thing because it's like it stuns them. And it was really hardcore. It was probably the most hardcore thing we had done in the show. And I'm like, well, we have to literally cut the throat of 4 different guys. And I'm not going to have time to reset it and clean them up and do it again. So I said, well, what if we just put the tube on the outside of the neck? So we made a little choker the performers wore and had little holes in it. And then as soon as the fake knife went by, the guy would go and turn the hose on and the blood would just come out. And then the VFX guys went in and erased the tube.
Right.
So it gave you instant blood. It looked so real that the ratings people were like, you can't show that on TV. So they came back and they trimmed it and they're like, okay, that looks better. And then I sat with the editor and I said, screw them. And we put it back. And then they watched it and they're like, yeah, that's fine. They don't know what they don't know the difference. So anyway, so that was a good question. All right. Yes.
That's amazing. I absolutely adore you. I've been watching you since I was 10. You're fabulous.
Oh, thanks.
My question is what is something from The Walking Dead that has pushed you outside of your comfort box to make or create?
Wow. The Walking Dead, I think the biggest challenge on The Walking Dead really was sort of switching your mindset from a movie schedule to a television schedule. I think on season 1, when we were shooting the last episode, when the zombies, or wait, there was a second, when all the zombies, they're walking down the street covered in the guts and it starts to rain. We had 200 zombies that day. And we would start at 4 a.m, make all the zombies up, go to set, wrap, clean them all up, and then go home. So we would get home at like 10 o'clock at night, and then we'd have to turn around like 4 hours later and get up for work again and just go back. That was before anyone was like, oh, you need turnaround. We're like, what's that? I don't have turnaround. But, I think that was probably the biggest challenge, was just coming up with a way to do it in a time schedule that wasn't going to hold up production.
Wow.
When we got into some of the CG blood stuff, there was just no way to shoot a scene and have the blood hit the walls and then cut and then clean the blood up and do another take. So what we would always do is we would do the first take with no blood, and we'd do it a couple times. And then once we knew we had it, then we'd go, all right. And then we'd turn all the blood hoses on and we'd go crazy with it. But again, because I wanted it to look real, I didn't want the blood elements to be CGI. We actually set up like a black curtain, and we set cameras up, and we filmed milk getting blown out of air mortars at different frame rates. Because if you shot like water out of a air cannon, it breaks up into little tiny droplets. But if you use milk has something in it that keeps it stringy and keeps it together. So we would shoot elements of milk.
Those as mats.
And we would use that, and then they would change the color to red, and then they would put it in the shot. So we were still using actual elements instead of just CG blood.
That is so cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, nice to meet you guys.
Hi.
I was just wondering, whenever you made a lot of this stuff, like whenever it went on video, went to like VHS, the older movies and stuff like that, does it ever bother you going back and watching things in higher definitions and seeing details that maybe you didn't think people would see in the future?
Yeah, I will tell you the one scene I'll never be able to live down, which just drives me crazy. We did a scene in Inglourious Bastards. We did a makeup on an actor named Martin Wuttke, who played Hitler. Mm-hmm. It's a big scene where he's got this big map room, and it was really fascinating because we shot the whole movie in Germany. We were filming at the studio where the SS used to have their propaganda stuff shot. It was kind of wild. And we had one day where this character played, and we got there in the morning early, did the makeup. And then the last scene of the day was close-ups of him, and he had the makeup on for 16 hours. And, the edges start to fray. There's just nothing you can do about it when you're doing prosthetics and stuff. You hit that point of no return. You're like, we did a scene at the end when he's sitting in, there's a firelight scene. It's like one shot, and you watch it and you can see where the edges of the prosthetics are. And I was like devastated. And I said to Quentin, I'm like, I will pay to digitally fix that shot because I wanted it to be perfect. And no one else, it didn't bother anybody else. But for me to this day, like, I can't watch that scene because it hurts. I'm like, oh.
Still a great movie.
It's still a great movie. Look, I mean, all the scalpings and all that crazy stuff. The funny thing about the scalpings are when we did the first tests, we did a test in the shop. I scalped one of my guys and we filmed it. And then when it came time to shoot the shot in the movie, we had a little insert stage set up. And on the other stage was the La Louisiane scene with Michael Fassbender when they're doing the 3 versus the 3. And they figure out that one of them is a spy. So we're shooting that scene on one stage, and the other stage is some trees. And Jake Garber, who was one of my makeup guys, is the guy we scalp. And I said to Quentin, I'm like, hey, so we're set up in the other room to shoot the scalping. And he's like, how you do it? He goes, just shoot it like you shot the test. So I directed the shot of the scalping in Inglourious Bastards because Quentin would always be like, you know how to do it. Just, I got this. I got, all Brad Pitt and all the actors are here. Just go do it.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Timer isn't working. I think we're almost out of time, but it's not counting down. So, but why don't we get another question at least here?
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, what was your favorite effect on New Nightmare with Wes Craven?
I traumatized Heather Langenkamp on that movie. Do you know the story?
I think I've heard a little bit because I've seen some interviews with her.
Okay, I saw Heather. She's talking about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Mm-hmm. There was a scene at the end of the movie with her and Miko Hughes, and we made this really crazy Freddy head, and the mouth opened, and then the tongue comes out and wraps around her head. So I saw Heather. I hadn't seen her in a couple of years, and I saw her last year at a convention, and she was like, I have PTSD from that scene. I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, the scene with the tongue wrapped around my face when it was all slimy. And she said, there was one night where I was having nightmares and my husband found me in the living room, like traumatized. And I didn't know I'd never heard that before. And in my head, it's like, oh, it's just a rubber tongue. It's like a rubber head. It's rubber. It's not real. And she had said, it just really, it screwed me up. And, I kind of really had a real adverse reaction to the way that women are portrayed as victims in horror movies. And I was like, I understand that, certainly, especially with the history of all that kind of stuff. But I had never heard that she had that reaction or that she had that. So, of course, I'm like, I have all the footage, but like that scene, I really loved shooting that scene. I didn't know that we were scarring her for life. I felt terrible afterwards, of course, when she told me that. But, the thing about Wes, when you work with someone like Wes, he's such a nice guy. Most of these guys, like George and Toby and Wes and Stuart Gordon, and they're all great guys. John Carpenter, they're all really great guys. So you don't know where that weird, dark stuff comes from. Yeah. But there's certainly not a malicious bone in their body, without a doubt. But I really love that. I love that effect and that scene. Really
Well, thank you. Well, listen, if you have more questions, Greg's going to be at his booth. He's going to be signing. He'll answer questions.
I think we have time for one more. It's only 4:30.
We're 10.
I thought we're supposed to go to 4:45.
No, sorry. They were giving me the sign, and I was like,
well, I didn't get the
five.
You didn't get this a sign, so
we
got
the sign
as long as I want. No. All right. By the way, so Soleil Moon Frye is up next, I think, and I did Pumpkinhead 2 with her, and then Lou Diamond Phillips is up after that, and I did a movie with him too. So I'm just basically here to introduce the people that are coming up after me. But it took me 45 minutes to do it. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Greg.
Don't go anywhere. GalaxyCon tradition is to gather everybody at the front and let Greg scalp you, and also to take a group selfie. So come forward, hang out in front of the stage and let the photographer do his thing.